Okay, let's continue from where we were discussing about the differences between the different approaches that are used in research. Now, last time I was discussing about the research methods versus research methodology. Now, these two are a bit different in the sense that the research methods, it defines the techniques and which a researcher can use in performing any research operation. Those techniques, we actually call them as research methods. I want you to undertake to understand that. Like in the previous part, we were discussing about the qualitative and the quantitative. Those could be like techniques that can be applied, and those ones can be defined as the methods, the approaches, the methods that can be used. Now, on the other part, when we talk about research methodology, we not only talk about the methods, we even include to consider the logic behind each method used in the context of our research study, and it can explain why we are using a particular method or technique and why we are not using others, so that the research results are capable of being evaluated either by the researcher himself. So you can actually see that when you talk of the methodology, you take a milestone, a mile, in order to explain the nitty-gritty to each and every method of interest, rather than just explaining what a method is all about. Now, let's look at the processes that can be governed when preparing the research design. Now, the research design, normally, it can be an easier task that can be considered. For example, the research problem having been formulated in a clear-cut term, the researcher will be required to prepare a research design. That is, he will have to state the conceptual structure within which the research would be conducted. So you must be able to explain the conceptual structure. I'll come to explain more, especially on this one. Let's carry it forward. Now, the research purpose may be grouped into 4 categories, namely exploratory category, descriptive category, diagnosis category, experimentation category. Remember those types of research: exploratory, descriptive, diagnosis, and experimentation. However, we can say there are several designs that can be used to define the research. Now, the most notable ones, we can have experimental and non-experimental hypothesis, which can be tested. I will not go into the nitty-gritty of that. Now, let's look at research process guidelines. When each and every one of us want to do any research, there are 10 plus 1 fundamental processes that must be considered. Firstly, formulating the research problem. Secondly, extensive literature survey. Take note of the word survey. Thirdly, developing the hypothesis from the extensively reviewed literature. Fourthly, preparing the research design. Say, how can I approach it? Fifth, determining the sample design. Sixth, collecting the data. Seventh, execution of the project. 8, analysis of data. 9, hypothesis testing. 10, generalization and interpretation. And 11, preparation of the report or presentation of the results. That is the formal write-up of conclusions reached. Now, I will not go into the nitty-gritty explaining what each section is all about, because these things will be repeated in more detail as we continue in this particular part. Now, that's why I will not take you into to read out these particular parts. I think we can be able to read through what these ones are all about, like determining the sample design. These we can be able to understand, and maybe I can be able to explain like the random, I mean the under the sampling we have got different types of sampling that are there. Now, to sample is to give a chance to each and every respondent to participate in the study. So that particular process is called sampling. And according to statistics for economists, we learned about different types of sampling, which I want each one of us to actually review. We have got systematic random sampling, cluster sampling, quarter sampling, stratified sampling, etc. So I want us to go back to that particular part and then we master, because we cannot go back and repeat in more detail, but I hope you did a very good job during that particular class. I'll just refer to it at this particular moment, but in more practical term. So I will not go into detail of this particular part. Now let's look at executing a project. When executing a project, there are a number of steps that must be followed. The first one is analysis of data. The second one is hypothesis testing after data has been analyzed, and thereafter you create what is called a generalization and interpretation. So take note, whether you are economics, whether you are gender, whether you are ABM, any type of research, when it is being executed, it must pass through analytical phase, hypothesis testing phase, generalization and interpretation phase. Now let's look at analysis phase. This is the process where you require a number of closely related operations, such as establishing the categories of data, where you can code data, you can edit data, you can create tables for data. And normally analysis work after tabulation is generally based on computation of variance percentages, it can be coefficients, etc., by applying various well-defined statistical formulas. We'll discuss more. And on the other part, we have got the hypothesis testing using various tests. We have got the chi-square test of association. Now I want to give a simple question which you can be able to find out, to say, when do we use chi-square test? When do we use t-test? When do we use f-test? When do we use correlational test? I want us to go back to look at that. And at this moment, this is where we talk of parametric tests and non-parametric tests. This is actually the inference from the statistics class. May I ask each one of us to go back to look at parametric tests and non-parametric tests? If we have got challenges, let's just go on YouTube. We can YouTube that and get information, so that we can be familiar with that, because these types of tests are very much important when we are testing the hypothesis that we wanted to find out from our studies, as to whether we can accept the hypothesis or reject it. So these tests are unsubstitutable and they cannot be substituted. Now let's look at generalization and interpretation. When all is said and done, when hypothesis has been analyzed and you have got your results, then you can make a generalization and you can interpret from there. So that at the end of the day, from the interpretation, this is where you can be able now to explain what that result mean. Then that can be put as the Bible truth in as far as your analysis is concerned. Okay, so I'll stop here for this particular slides, and I hope you have understood what I was trying to communicate, and I want each one of you to go through this over and over and over so that you can get familiar to the terminologies that have just ushered in. And the next lesson will now look at how to identify a topic and how to come up with an argument, an academic argument, and at the same time how can we connect our argument to a problem statement, to research question, to justification, and to the outline of whatever thing that you want to study. So I will be able to upload the next slide explaining this particular concept which I've just summarized very soon. Thank you.